A good man is hard to find. That's the backstory of Ruth chapter 3. It's all about the strangest marriage proposal in the Bible. If you're looking for ways to ask someone to marry you, the strategy that Ruth employed will likely be at the bottom of your list. Here's what we have. A woman asks a man to marry her and he agrees. That's a bit unusual. But there's more to consider. A foreigner asks a Jew to marry her. That's extremely unlikely. And if we peer a little closer, we realize that an employee asks her boss to marry her. Stranger yet, finally, it's a younger woman who approaches an older man at midnight on the threshing floor to ask him to marry her. All of this is highly irregular, to say the least. The story teaches us that God has his ways, and sometimes those ways seem a little strange indeed. Nothing, as we said, about their marriage or their marriage seems normal, at least by modern standards. Ruth didn't have very many good options. Today, she might write an ad like this: widowed woman from Moab seeks godly Israelite man of character for long walks in the barley fields and quiet evenings by the fire, must like children. Now, that wasn't an option 3,000 years ago. Good man is hard to find, that is true, but a good woman is also hard to find. Ruth 3 tells us how a good man and a good woman found each other and ended up getting married. It's proof positive that God works in, with, and through our choices to accomplish his will. The story seems so unlikely that it must be true. Filed it under Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. The chapter divides into 3 scenes. Number 1, a risky plan. The second part is a midnight proposal. And then the third one is a providential pause. The whole episode happens overnight. It begins one evening. The main event happens around midnight, with the final scene taking place early the next morning. Let's look at this risky plan in verses 1 through 6. Harvest time had come. And that's the key to everything else in the story. After many years of famine, there was a harvest at last. And that's why Naomi knew that Boaz would be at the threshing floor. When you read threshing floor, don't think of a barn, but imagine a flat spot near the top of a hill where the wind could separate the barley from the chaff. It was the happiest time of the year for farmers because it meant their hard work was about to pay off. Months earlier, they had planted barley and then waited for the rains to come. As owner of the land, Boaz would be at the threshing floor to oversee his workers. He would spend the night there to protect the crop from thieves. That's why Naomi knew where to find Boaz on this particular night. This brings her to a plan which she hatched to provide rest for Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law. She and Ruth had already experienced kindness from Boaz, and now it was time to take the next step. Her plan was risky, to say the least. Verses 3 through 5 read this way: wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying, go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do. Why would she suggest such a preposterous scheme? We find the key in verse 2. Isn't Boaz a relative? Naomi has already taken Ruth in and made her part of the family, even though she's from Moab. Now, that's an astonishing statement in and of itself, but then she calls Boaz a relative. In some way or another, he was related to Elimelech, Naomi's late husband, a cousin, an uncle, more distant relative, we don't know. But he shared the same family tree as Elimelech, which means that he was qualified to be a kinsman redeemer. To fill that role, he must be a relative able to take on the responsibility, and above all, he must be willing to do it. The kinsman redeemer stepped in during a time of great need to preserve the family property and to maintain the family line. Naomi knows all of this, and she knows Boaz could rescue Ruth and provide a home and future for her. He and Ruth could also have a baby, which would preserve the name of her late husband. All of this, no doubt, was on her mind. Some Bible commentators take a dim view or Naomi's plan because they think it was borderline immoral. Some even think that she wanted Ruth to convince Boaz to sleep with her. I've already said that the plan was risky, and it was dangerous for a young woman, a foreigner, to go to a threshing floor at night dressed in this fashion. You can think of a dozen ways that this could go wrong. The story is in the Bible because it's true, not because we need to do what Ruth did. Beyond the risk factor, I see no evidence that Naomi had bad motives. Remember that Ruth and Boaz had already met in the harvest field, and she'd already made a positive impression on him. He knew about her loyal love for Naomi and how Ruth had left Moab to live with her. Plus, he saw that how hard she worked in the field. Her reputation preceded her. He'd already welcomed her, and he warned his men not to bother her. He had invited her to his table and sent her home with grain. Perhaps thoughts of romance had already entered Boaz's mind. Certainly, he appreciated how difficult it was for a woman from her background to come to Bethlehem. But think about it for a moment. Boaz couldn't approach Ruth. She was young, she was a widow, she was from Moab, and she was now working for him. In that culture, at that time, it couldn't happen. Understanding that, Naomi hatches her audacious scheme. Was she a matchmaker? If so, who could blame her for wanting to see Ruth and Boaz get married? Boaz was a good man, and Ruth was a good woman. That much had already been established. If Boaz can't propose to Ruth, then she can propose to him. The details about her dress and perfume simply set the scene. They would show Boaz how serious she was. Far from being some sort of midnight seduction, here was a way, perhaps the only way, for this man and woman to come together as husband and wife. Note how specific Naomi is. She knew Boaz would sleep with his head facing inward and his feet outward. But Ruth had to find a way to arrive at the threshing floor undetected, figure out where he was sleeping, and wait until he had finished eating and drinking. Finally, she was to uncover his feet because that would guarantee that eventually he would wake up. Perhaps the most surprising part is Ruth's response in verse 5. I will do everything that you say. She knew the risk involved. There were many reasons to say no, but she said yes. And thus does God's plan unfold for his children. When Walt Kaiser preached on this chapter, he called it veiled providence. That's a fine phrase that perfectly balances both sides of the story. On one hand, it looks as if Ruth is taking a big risk on her own. But behind Naomi's plan stood God, who orchestrated every detail, including Boaz's cold feet that woke him up at midnight. Faith means taking a risk for God and leaving the results in his hands. When the sun went down and Ruth left for the threshing floor, Naomi was pacing nervously, not knowing what would happen next. And that's how faith works. We take a step forward, following the light we have, trusting God to bring us out in the right place. Sometimes things don't work out as we plan, but that's okay too. Our part is to take the first step, and God will take care of the rest. Scene 1 ends with Ruth stepping into the evening darkness, wondering how Boaz will respond because her future hangs in the balance. Scene 2 is the midnight proposal in verses 7 through 15. Midnight comes and all is quiet on the threshing floor. Suddenly a man stirs, realizing his feet are uncovered. Peered into the darkness, Boaz makes out the form of a woman lying at his feet. That was startling and troubling. Was she a prostitute? After all, it was known that men could buy sexual favors at the threshing floor. And so Boaz asks, who are you? And no doubt her answer shocked him. Verse 8, I am Ruth, your servant. She replied, take me under your wing, for you are a family redeemer. That's a straightforward marriage proposal. The phrase, take me under your wing, can also be translated as spread your covering over me. It was Ruth's way of saying, marry me and bring me under your protection. She uses the same Hebrew word Boaz used in Ruth 2 and 12 when he described the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. He knew exactly what she meant. As I've come to God for my spiritual refuge, I'll now come to you for my personal refuge. If Boaz had been a lesser man, he might have tried to take advantage of her. He could have said, well, let's sleep together and I'll think about it more in the morning. But he didn't do that. He responds in three ways that shows the greatness of his character. First, he prays that God will bless her because this kindness to him is greater than her earlier kindness to Naomi. She could have married a younger man for passion or for money, but she didn't. Second, he agrees to do what she asks because everyone knows she is a woman of noble character. It's the same word used in Proverbs 31 of the noble or virtuous or excellent woman. Though Ruth doesn't know it yet, Boaz has agreed to do more than she asked. She wanted him to marry her, but he has promised to guarantee her future with or without him. Here we take a sudden detour in the story. Boaz is willing to marry her, but there's another man who is a closer relative, and he must have the first choice in the matter. Verse 13, stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, that's good. Let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie down until the morning. Boaz cares so much for Ruth and Naomi that he's willing for the other man to redeem Ruth, even if it meant Boaz could never marry her. He only wants her needs to be met. Third, he protects her reputation and provides a pledge to Naomi. She is to leave in the pre-dawn darkness so that no rumors could get started. The gift of grain is like a dowry payment to Naomi. 6 measures of barley might weigh 60 to 90 pounds. Boaz's extravagant gesture to Naomi was intended to show his commitment to both women. A lesser man might say, I'll marry Ruth, but I'm not going to worry about Naomi. But Boaz was not a lesser man. The second scene ends as the sun rises over the mountain to the east. Scene 3, the Providential Pause, verses 16 through 18. If we were writing the story, we would go straight to the wedding. That's not how life works. Every relationship has its ups and downs, twists and turns. No doubt Ruth went home elated and deflated. She had every reason to smile because Boaz not only welcomed her, he had promised to marry her if he could. If he could. Those 3 little words hung in the air. There was another man, a mystery man, a closer relative who had the first right of refusal. Boaz couldn't be the kinsman redeemer until the first man turned it down. How would that happen? What if the other man decided to marry her? Would she have to do the whole threshing floor at midnight routine again? So many questions flooded her mind. And that's when Naomi offered some very sensible advice. Verse 18, Naomi said, my daughter, wait until you find out how things go, for he won't rest unless he resolves this today. The word translated wait can mean to sit down. We would say sit tight, because sometimes the godless thing that you can do is sit down and wait. Waiting time is not wasted time if you're waiting on the Lord. And as the chapter draws to a close, it seems like the story has hit a snag, but it is a providential pause that sets up the final act. It gives us some time to think about each person in the story. Naomi's heart has been warmed by the Lord. The woman who came home bitter and empty now sees God at work behind the scenes. And when she returned to Bethlehem, she was hungry and penniless, but that's about to change for good. Ruth has taken the daring step of proposing to Boaz. She does it in a way that gives Boaz the option to say no, but he is not about to refuse her. Clearly, the Lord has stirred up love between these two unlikely people. Boaz has acted with the highest character, and when another man might have taken advantage of the situation, he doesn't. And no matter what happens next, Ruth is going to have a husband, and Naomi will never want again. So what about the snag? Well, as Shakespeare says, the course of true love never does run smooth. Faith waits for what faith wants. How different that is from the way most of us live, waiting is one of the hardest parts of the Christian life. Thousands act who cannot wait. And we all spend a big chunk of our lives waiting for things to happen. For every green light, it seems like there are always 5 yellow ones and a dozen red ones. We must all wait whether we like it or not. And in this case, Ruth must wait for Boaz to take care of the matter. Perhaps it will be resolved favorably, but maybe not. And when it cannot do anything, faith waits on the Lord. Oh, how hard it is for most of us. But waiting has its uses. It slows us down, gives us time to think and to pray. And it teaches us that God is in charge, not us. Was it daring for Ruth to approach Boaz at midnight? Without a doubt. Could she have been seen by others? Definitely. Was it risky to put on that attractive dress and wear perfume? No question. So many things might have gone wrong. I began by saying that a good man is hard to find. But a good woman is hard to find too. And in Ruth 3, a good woman finds her good man. And it happens through a risky plan that leads to a midnight proposal and ends with a providential pause. Fingerprints of God are all over this story. Ruth 3 shows us how God works through our choices to accomplish his will for our lives. He used Naomi's plan, Ruth's daring, and Boaz's integrity to bring them to the brink of marriage. Though they don't know it yet, that union will produce a child who will be the ancestor of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. This story is going to have a happy ending, but we're not quite there yet. Stay tuned. You won't believe how Boaz solves the snag and clears the way for a happy wedding day. Amen.